Good morning, and thank you for joining us for today's episode in the museum's Facebook Live series. I'm your host, historian Edna Friedberg. During each program, we discuss an aspect of Holocaust history and its relevance to our world today. Here in the United States, June is Pride Month. It's a time to recognize the contributions of the LGBTQ+ community. And at our museum, it's typically an opportunity to teach about a lesser-known victim group of the Nazis. During the 12-year Nazi rule, the Germans made more than 100,000 arrests, often with no proof, under a law that criminalized sexual acts between men. Many of them were sent to prison. Between 5,000 and 15,000 men were sent to concentration camps, where they were subjected to hard labor, cruelty, and sometimes even medical experiments aimed at providing a so-called cure to what was portrayed as deviant behavior. Please welcome our guest for this program, Dr. Klaus Mueller, our museum's representative for Europe. Hi, Klaus, or actually, good afternoon to you, right?
Thank you, Edna. Good to be here.
Through interviews and research over the course of many years, Klaus has done a great deal to uncover personal stories and acquire documents and objects that help us to better understand, with nuance and complexity, the experiences of gay people during the Holocaust. Now, as I mentioned, Klaus, during Pride Month, we often here at the museum focus on the Nazi persecution of gay men in particular. But today we're taking a different approach. We're going to be sharing stories of two people most of our viewers have probably never heard of, Frida Belinfante and Willem Arandeus, gay members of the Dutch resistance. Why don't we know their stories?
Thank you, Edna. I think this is the crucial question for our conversation today. What a society chooses to remember says as much about history as it does about its present time. And after 1945, post-war decades were marked by intense homophobia, and it was also a time when expectations of women were very limited. This influenced, of course, what and who was remembered. Although many women had participated in the resistance, after the war, resistance fighters were depicted as male, heroic, and certainly heterosexual. Gays and lesbians did not fit into that post-war image. Women did not fit into that image. So our history telling is incomplete. It's only in the last decade that we can challenge this narrative and discover that LGBTI people not only live today, but indeed existed throughout history, and of course contributed to history. So it's a very special tribute today in this year's Pride Month to remember the bravery and sacrifice of Willem Arandeus and Frida Belinfante, and to tell their stories that were suppressed for so long.
And we will certainly be introducing our audience to them today. We just saw two wartime or close to wartime era portraits of the two of them. But I also want to note that, of course, gay people, like any other human being, they have always been part of every aspect of society, and we're that way also during this period. And we share a commitment, I know you and I, to not reducing people's identity to their sexuality. But today I hope that we can discuss how that identity shaped and drove some of their actions. Let's start by talking a little bit about Frida Belinfante. Please introduce us to this extraordinary woman.
Edna, I came to know Frida very late in her life. At the age of 90, she had terminal cancer, but she agreed to be interviewed by me on video to tell me what was then an unknown story of her work with the resistance. She told me over the phone then, "I will try to stay alive until you come to interview me, but I can't promise it, so you better hurry up." So she had a very matter-of-fact and down-to-earth approach upon her death. Frida was born in the Netherlands, and her family was connected, and here you see a picture of her playing the cello. Her family was connected by the love for music, and Frida did choose to play the cello within the family and with her siblings. She told me music was our religion. And here you see her sisters and her brother. That's in Amsterdam around 1940 at the Stadhouderskade. Frieda's father was owning a music school. He was Jewish, and her mother was Christian. Frieda not only was a cello player, but she discovered another talent as well. She became one of Europe's first female conductors. And Frieda's first love, and you see, I love this portrait of these two women sitting in their apartment. Frieda's partner was a well-known music composer then. They're sitting here in their apartment in Amsterdam South, and I'm mentioning that because we discovered when we were preparing the video interview that we lived in the same building block, that we actually looked at the same garden, only 60 years apart. So there was a lot of connection because of that also.
Love when those kind of overlaps happen. It makes you think
was amazing.
if these walls could talk, right?
Exactly.
So Frieda was living this life, as you said, a pioneering conductor, had a successful, happy personal life, but things changed for her radically when Germany invaded the Netherlands, in fact, on what was her 36th birthday, May 10th, 1940. What made Frieda turn from making music to joining the underground resistance movement in the Netherlands?
Frieda and her friends, of course, had followed closely what happened in Germany after the Nazis' rise to power in 1933. And many German Jews had escaped to the Netherlands. And the Germans swiftly imposed restrictions on many aspects of life in the Netherlands after occupation. One was a requirement that artists, writers, architects, actors, and musicians had to register with a newly established Nazi German Chamber of Culture if they wanted to continue to work. Jews were automatically excluded from becoming members. So if you were not part of this chamber, you could not publish, play on stage, or perform music. And Frieda refused to play music under a Nazi policy that discriminated against so many people close to her. And I remember in the interview, she said, "Boys, there is no orchestra anymore. There is no cultural life we can be part of anymore." So she dissolved the orchestra and pretty quickly went into the resistance. And Frieda and other members of the Artist Society established a fund to provide support for artists who could not join the Nazi Chamber of Culture or were automatically excluded. But soon this group focused on more directly opposing Nazi policies through a variety of underground and highly dangerous activities while continuing to support these artists financially.
I'd like to pause for a moment to greet and welcome our viewers who are watching from around the country and around the world. Good morning, and thank you for joining us from the cities of Cleveland, Chicago, Santa Fe. Hello to you in Cary, North Carolina, and Miami. And a warm welcome also to our international viewers who are tuning in from Guatemala, Switzerland, Israel, and Scotland. We're glad that you're here. Now, Klaus, I understand that even before the war, the Netherlands, the Dutch government, already tracked its citizens through a national registry. They had population data, places of residence, things like that. But after the German invasion, the Nazis could easily pinpoint the Jewish population by exploiting these existing files. What did Frieda do to help shield the identities of Dutch Jews so that they would not be as easily targeted?
Yes, Edna, the Dutch had a very modern registration system of the populace. So the German occupiers forced them to mark identity cards of the Dutch Jews with a capital J. And you see an example here so that they could more easily identify Dutch Jews. So Frieda started making false ID cards without the J to help Dutch Jews hiding under other identities. And how did she do that? She asked her friends to lose their identity papers. Then she reused the original to create false ID cards. She made a few at first and then later got help to mass produce them. Members of the artist group helped to distribute them, which was also a dangerous activity. Jews and others in hiding needed ID cards, when they were stopped by the police, which of course happened frequently at that time.
And we've been talking about Frida so far, but we actually have, thanks to your interview with her talking in her own words. So I'd like us to hear from Frida a clip from her reflecting many decades after the war about what inspired her to help people.
I feel very lonesome if there's nobody around that I can help and love and protect. And I don't understand people that can only live for themselves. I can't understand it. Where do you get your happiness? Where do you get your satisfaction? What do you do with your life? What do you do with your strength? There must be somebody that needs help. Always is.
I think what you see, Edna, here is Frida and the compassionate Frida who wants to help people, and she did that throughout her life. Not just in the time during the Nazi period. There is another Frida that I discovered in the interview, because I asked her, how did you come through this time? Weren't you afraid? And Frida said, I want to look danger in the eye. Oh. She was not afraid to shy away. The word no did not restrict her. And we see that throughout her life. The first time she tried to be a conductor, she was turned down because she was a woman, but she persisted and she was not afraid, as she said, to look the danger in the eye.
But she certainly had a lot to be afraid of. As we've mentioned, under German anti-Jewish policy, Frida would have been considered half Jewish. Many people, probably most people, would have just tried to keep their head down, not attract attention, not do anything scary. Wasn't Frida just putting herself at increased risk?
Oh, absolutely, Edna. Frida not only made false ID cards, she helped finding hiding places for Dutch Jews, an illegal and highly risky activity. She helped distributing the ID cards. So if Frida were caught, she could have ended up in a concentration camp, and she knew that. So, in fact, Frida was nearly caught at least once. The Gestapo searched her apartment when she had false identification papers on her piano, tucked away in music sheets. And Frida was able, being very calm, to distract the officers, and she was not caught. Through the resistance also, and I think that would be an important topic, Frida formed some of her most important relationships, including her friendship with Willem Arendeus, who was also an artist.
Now, Willem had his own distinctive motivations for joining the resistance. Can you tell us very briefly about his life before the war? Because I think it shapes how he behaves later.
Willem grew up in Amsterdam, and here you see a wonderful portrait of him, the young man as an artist. He wanted to become an artist, and did so. He was a talented painter and writer. His relationship with his parents was difficult, and they didn't approve of him being gay or understood his artistic aspirations. The Netherlands then was a repressive place, unlike now, to live as a gay man. You could be prosecuted for indecent behavior, society looked down at you, so it was not easy. But Willem, as an exception, lived openly as he could. And here you see another portrait when he retreated, because he was also very poor, to the island of Urk, where it was cheaper to live and paint it. In his diaries, you get a good view on him. He wrote about being kicked out of apartments because he was gay. There was no protection. In Germany, we know that the Nazis in 1935 radicalized an existing law called Paragraph 175 that criminalized sexual contact between men. It allowed arrests without much proof, a neighbor's denunciation, a romantic postcard, or a kiss. So all of this could be used as evidence. And after the Germans invaded the Netherlands in 1940, they implemented a very similar law. The law did not extend to women because the Nazis thought that lesbians could be persuaded or forced to have children, to propagate the Aryan master race. So soon after the German occupation, the targeting of gay people began, and Willem joined the resistance in Amsterdam. He was not Jewish, so he could have joined the Nazi Chamber of Culture, but that, I think, never crossed his mind.
And how then did Willem's activities in the underground resistance help him to find his passion, his voice?
It's interesting, Edna. When you read the diary, you see an insecure artist, even doubting his own success. He always felt as an outsider in his family, but also later as an artist. But when he joined the resistance, he found his own voice. You see a man who is determined, who knows the risks, but he also doesn't feel like an outsider anymore. He loved working with Frida. In fact, they saw each other as brother and sister, as Frida recounts in the interview. And here's a photo of him in 1943. He started on his own, creating an underground pamphlet against the Nazis, raised awareness about the plight of the Jews, which was a risky act. And he helped, like Frida, with creating fake ID cards for Jews and tried to recruit also others to join the resistance.
Klaus, we have a special greeting from our mutual friend Al Munzer, a survivor from the Netherlands who also volunteers at our museum. He's watching and he sends his greetings.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining, Al.
I want to be clear to our viewers who may not be familiar with the course of the war and the course of the Holocaust in the Netherlands, that the Nazi assault on the Jews there was very brutal and brutally efficient. Only about 1/4 of the pre-war Jewish population of that country survived the Holocaust. Jews were deported from Amsterdam, from other places around the country. We see here a deportation action. You can see whole families, little kids, old people. This is in 1943. And during 2 intense years, more than 100,000 Jewish men, women, children were deported, mostly to the Nazi killing centers of Auschwitz and Sobibor, where they were murdered. And I want us to keep this in mind because help from local Dutch resistors like Frida, like Willem, could make all the difference. As many as 30,000 Jews went into hiding in the Netherlands with the help of the underground, and about 2/3 of them survived the war. Others did not. Some, for example, probably the best known is Anne Frank. She and her family were betrayed by a collaborator. So this is, life and death work. And Klaus, at some point, the success, the scale of Willem and Frida's network actually made the operation vulnerable because the group created some 70,000 false ID cards. This could draw attention to it. And we are seeing here some rare photographs of a forger at work creating these life-saving protective documents. The members of this resistance network realized that their fake ID cards could all too easily be double-checked in the centralized Amsterdam registry that we discussed earlier, where you could see, this ID card actually is not the person who it's supposed to represent. And this endangered everyone who was protected by carrying these cards. What did the group decide to do to protect against their strategy being uncovered and disrupted?
Edna, they planned one of the most daring acts of resistance in the Netherlands during the Holocaust. They decided to bomb the Amsterdam population registry to destroy the original ID cards that you just mentioned. They planned the operation for months. An architect in the group studied the building, others watched the security patrolling the building. They built homemade bombs, so no detail was too small. With the help of inside information, they learned what kind of fabric was used for Dutch police uniforms and got the help of a tailor, who was also gay, to create replicas they would wear to infiltrate the building. Frida and the other women of the resistance participated in all of these preparational activities, but in the end, the men decided they should not be part of the actual attack because the physical labor, in their view, was too strong. Frida really wanted to be part of this group.
So did all of this meticulous planning pay off? Did it work?
Oh, yes, it did. Their months of planning paid off. On March 27, 1943, that was a Saturday evening, members of the resistance group wearing Dutch police uniforms arrived at the registry building, claiming they needed to search the building for bombs. Two medical students who were part of the group then sedated the guards and carried them across the street. They didn't want to hurt anyone. Other resistant members, meanwhile, followed the architectural plans and planted the fire bombs throughout the building. And as they left the building, they put up signs that read "explosion hazard," so that not anyone would enter the building while the explosion would happen. They really prepared everything well, and Frida watched everything from a nearby rooftop. The mission was really a blow to the German, and here you see the result. That's the registry, and you see the ID cards all over the floor. So the mission was a blow to the Germans and a huge success for the Dutch resistance. Until then, most Dutch underground groups had attacked German institutions, but Willem's and Frida's group sent a strong message. This was a direct attack to a Dutch institution, and it said, if you collaborate with the Germans, you will not be exempt. And I think that was a turning point in the history of resistance.
Absolutely. And I want to note we have a comment from a viewer named Elisa, who writes, "It's absolutely amazing what some brave souls were able to accomplish under the most horrific circumstances, knowing what they would face if caught. The word brave just doesn't describe it well enough." And cannot agree more, Elisa.
Yeah,
it was
thank you.
incredibly.
Thank you, Elisa, because you really understand the danger was so imminent and so direct. They risked their lives.
And as you described, Klaus, it was very effective, the attack. The explosion destroyed some 800,000 documents. We're seeing here photos of the registry offices after the attack. And the resistance members walked away with around 600 blank documents that they could now use to create additional ID cards, and around 50,000 Dutch guilders, which was a lot of money at the time. But they indeed paid a very high price. What happened to the conspirators after this daring attack?
The fallout was bitter, Edna. There is no other word for that. Following the attack, the local German head of police announced a significant reward for anyone who could help to identify the conspirators. And the network that was necessary to prepare that attack had become larger and larger. And that, of course, caused the danger. Information got out little by little. So within days, Willem and many others in the group were arrested. He was interrogated, but he did not give away any of his fellow resistors. The photo montage, that's from the Nazi intelligence service, the German Nazi intelligence service. You see Arandeus in the middle row, second photo from the top. And they were using these photos to track down the members of the group. The Germans made a point of putting on a show trial. They wanted to demonstrate that it was Jews, half-Jews, and homosexuals behind the attack, and tried to make a point about groups of people they vilified. In the trial, Willem took full responsibility. In June 1943, he was sentenced to death, and he and 11 other members of the group were executed in the same month. So some of the women were also arrested and were sent to concentration camps. So a very bitter fallout. And in his last visit with his lawyer, Willem asked her to make sure that Dutch society knew the contributions of gay people in the group, that some of them gave their lives for the national cause.
Wow, it's hard to imagine that conversation, and also, though, to think of the very purposeful way that Willem saw himself, that he knew that he could not only be accomplishing something tangible, but could also strike a blow to maybe change bias or homophobic ideas through his actions and his bravery.
That was his hope, yes.
Let's hear again from his close friend and co-worker, Frida, describing a conversation that she remembers having with Willem that shows they were acutely aware just how much was at stake for each of them.
One time we had a conversation about the danger that was over our head. And I said, or he said, do you think that we see the end of this war? And I said, I don't think so. He said, I don't either. And then he said, do you mind? And I said, no, I don't. He said, I don't either. So I knew exactly that I had a partner who had the same point of view that I had. And I might have added, well, I'd rather give my life for something than give it for nothing. I want a high price for mine. He says, I think the same way.
Really extraordinary.
That's Frida.
Yeah, kindred spirits, but also knowingly and deliberately taking on these risks. Klaus, we have a question from the audience. A viewer named Jack is asking, what took the Dutch 40 years to recognize their bravery and sacrifice? Could you describe what happened? Were students taught about them, for example?
Thank you, Jack, for this question. No. So his bravery was not recognized, as you rightly say, for 40 years. The attack was hailed as a mark of Dutch resistance. It was taught to Dutch pupils for many decades, but Willem's leadership was omitted, most likely because he was gay. And so his last wish was not fulfilled. They never learned about his strong motive, that he wanted to contribute and be visible as a gay man in the national resistance. Only in 1944, participants in the attack, including Willem, were posthumously honored with the Dutch Resistance Memorial Cross. So in short, in the 1950s and 60s, homophobia really deterred that kind of recognition. The national resistance was the core of a people, of a nation, and with it, that core, gays and lesbians had no place.
We have a question from the audience from a viewer named Rita, who asks, they were brave men and women. In her opinion, their sexuality is no business of ours. You don't mention heterosexual heroes, so why bring this up? They were heroes, period. What are your thoughts on that, Klaus?
Well, we always know about the personal lives as well. We know about heterosexual resistance fighters who were married, about their children, how their wives coped maybe with the loss. The reason that this story and the contribution of Willem Arendeus and Frida Bel-Infante was never told as a natural part of this national resistance was exactly because they were gay and lesbian, and because this was seen as unfit with the respectable image of resistance fighters. So their stories were suppressed, and it's important to acknowledge their contribution. And it's important to understand that there is no one resistance fighters. Resistance fighters come from different angles in life and have different motives. And what we got in the immediate post-war years was a very restricted image that I don't think does justice to the resistance fighters, and also does not justice to the complexity of resistance during the Holocaust. So that's why it's important to really look at very different stories. And yes, sexuality and sexual orientation played an important role for them in their work.
I agree completely, Klaus. And also as a historian, I always find it extremely informative and necessary to understand the totality of a human being, because their experiences, either as someone of prominence or as someone on the margins of society, these are the kinds of experiences and identities that often drive people to make choices. And so if we just look in kind of isolation at one chapter of their lives, I don't think we really understand the full picture. So that's what it makes sense to me also in terms of the writing of a full history. Now, Klaus, Frida was not caught in this roundup. She was fortunate. What did she do when she realized that so many members of her group had been arrested? That must have been a terrifying time for her.
It was terrifying. The Gestapo knew Frida's identity and was looking for her. So Frida decided to hide in plain sight. At first, she wore a suit. She had her hair cut, and here you see a wonderful photo of her. Her hair cut short, and she lowered her voice when she spoke in order to disguise herself as a man. And she later recalled in the interview that even when she passed her mother did not recognize her because she successfully passed as a man. But Frida soon felt that she was endangering others in a circle. She still tried to participate in the resistance, but eventually decided she needed to escape the Netherlands. She managed to escape to Paris, but felt she wasn't safe there either. So she decided all by herself to move, to leave occupied France to neutral Switzerland. Now, this is in the winter of 1944, in February 1944. It was one of the harshest winters in many, many years. And I visited the place where she crossed the border in the summer. And it's unimaginable how she was able to do that. There was snow everywhere. And at one point, she even waded through an ice-cold river to reach Switzerland.
But she did make it, and she was able to survive by being in neutral territory. Klaus, can you briefly tell us about Frida's life after the war? Having been through these experiences, where did she go? What did she do?
Edna, she was disappointed by how quickly the sacrifices of the resistance were forgotten in post-war Netherlands. So at the age of 43, in 1947, she decided to emigrate to the United States. She had some loose contacts, and she crossed the country to California. You here actually see a little car she and her partner at that time bought, and Frida told me she was more under the hood than driving the car, but she knew how to repair a car. And eventually she found her way back to music and helped to found the Orange County Philharmonic Orchestra and served as its conductor in 1954 and onwards. But despite being successful with Orange County Philharmonic, in 1962, Frida learned, reading a newspaper article, that her orchestra was going to be disbanded and she was, that her contract would not be renewed. So that was a bitter disappointment. She recalled rumors about her being a lesbian making the rounds, and she believed that anti-gay prejudice was to blame for that very sudden change of a very successful orchestra. So she moved to Santa Fe, she gave private music lessons, and she never looked back.
Klaus, we're having a very lively conversation in the comment section on Facebook. I hope you'll have a chance to look at it later, but I do want to share just a couple of comments. Richard writes, "Thank you so much for this program. The topic is largely unknown and is very important to the world and to history. It should be known and it should be taught."
Thank you, Richard.
Additionally, a man named Elliot writes, "We hear more and more stories of these courageous men and women resistance fighters, no matter what their religion, nationality, or orientation. Stories that deserve to be known and told decades ago. We must always remember them, as well as all the victims."
I completely agree, yes.
Thank you, Elliot. Thank you, Richard. And that's why we're doing this program, so it's gratifying to know that it is resonating with you. Klaus, in the few minutes that we have left, what can people watching today, in your opinion, take away from the stories of Frida and Willem? What's the bigger picture here?
Well, Frida knew that I was gay, and we built this connection. And I think she gave me an amazing gift by sharing her life. She told her story for the first time without omitting that she was a lesbian, sharing also her experiences of discrimination because she was a lesbian woman. So while she was 90 years old and had terminal cancer, she was determined to do this interview. This interview became her legacy, and Frida changed the way how we today remember the Dutch resistance. The story we know today is more complete and it no longer omits members of the resistance because they happen to be gay or lesbian. And I feel very honored to be able to share Frida's life, her bravery, her amazing humanity. She's now recognized in the Netherlands as the historical figure she is. And Willem is someone I felt I came to know more through his diaries and research. And I recently gave a talk about his life in Amsterdam, and it was amazing and wonderful to see how that presentation drew both a younger and older generation, and how you see that the times have changed, and that these audience, young and old, take pride and honor him for his resilience, his determination, his bravery. So as Frida's and Willem's stories become better known, I think we all benefit from a more complex understanding of the power of individuals during the Holocaust. And personally, for me, this was a very spiritual meeting I had with Frida. I will carry it with me for the rest of my life, and she will always stay very, very dear to me. So I'm very happy that we can talk about Frida and Willem today to a larger audience.
Well, Klaus, it's been such a pleasure to have you as a guest and to hear the obvious passion that you have for shedding light on these two brave people, helping us better understand their courage and their work. So thank you.
Thank you, Edna, for this conversation.
I'd like to, in closing, mention one more viewer comment. A man named David writes, as a gay Jew and the son of a German Jewish refugee, I cannot thank you both enough for keeping these stories alive. David, it's our honor and privilege to do it. Thank you for sharing that personal connection. And they wouldn't have used this word, but Frida and Willem's work, looking back, was an incredible display of what we would now call allyship. As I mentioned earlier, who people are when they come into a time of crisis shapes who they are in a time of danger. So in the case of these two people, in the case of Jews during the war, we need to really understand human beings in their totality, the full arc of their life and experience. And you've helped us to do that today, Klaus. So thank you.
Thank you, Edna. And thank you, David.
To our viewers, we're so glad that you were with us today, that this program resonated with you, and we hope you'll join us for our next episode on Wednesday, July 14th at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time. We'll be taking a look at comic books that took on Hitler and the Nazis, from well-known superheroes in the 1930s and 40s who, in illustration, were fighting against Hitler and the Nazis, to later comics and graphic novels decades later that finally identified explicitly the Jewish victims and the Holocaust. So we hope to see you then on July 14th. Until then, wherever you are watching, be safe and be well. Bye-bye.